Hello, this is Max from Arrowhertz, and today we're going to be building rhinos. Since 1988, GW had come up with two plastic rhino kits. There was the first one, which was around from 1988 till about the early 2000s, which then was replaced by the newer kit, which is a bit bigger, and you'll probably see more common amongst the Space Marine players today. Now, we're going to be building both of these rhinos, not just one. I've got the sprues for both kits here. And I'd like to start this by examining the sprues from each kit, starting with the first run. So we've got the old Rhino here. Moving my camera a bit. So we've got the old sprue, which came with two pairs of the same sprue. There was the sides, and the door hatches, which came with the exhausts and the top hatch. You got two of these top hatches because there were two twin sprues. You also got the top and the bottom for the main part of the vehicle, which came with two of these hatches. So to move on to the next Rhino, the one with this has movable parts. It has an openable door on the back, an internal detail. It's a much more detailed model. And the sprue, where it was also much larger, came with many more pieces that you'd have to put together. So, I'd like to start by building the more commonly seen newer one. Now, the reason that I chose to do this rhino first is because if you're watching this video to learn how to build a rhino, you're probably going to be building this one, as it's going to be more common. If you're going to be building the older one, you can watch that in part 2, as that will be much less likely and more rare. So, there's three things that you're going to be wanting to bring when you're building a rhino, or when you're building any model off of the sprue. You're going to want to bring glue. I just have cheap glue that I bought from the Max at the corner of the street. You're going to want to bring your X-Acto or a sharp knife, something to cut it out, or sometimes it's better to use clippers. And you're also going to want to bring some paper towel, in case you cut yourself and the blood god decides to bring you a visit, which is not very nice. I've had gashes all over just from building models for the blood god, which I've got my corn berserkers somewhere around here. Alright. Either way, let's get back to this rhino, because this is not about corn. You know, what isn't about corn. Either way. So, when you're building a model, you're always gonna hear that you're gonna want to cut away from yourself. Now that's true. You don't want to cut away. You want to cut away from yourself, but that doesn't mean you don't want to cut towards yourself like this. You're gonna want to cut away from your skin. What I do is I look for parts on the sprue that have things that I can put my thumb against and protect myself against the knife. should always make sure to dry fit all the pieces before gluing them, and to cut off any of the parts that you missed when cutting it off of the sprue, as this could cause problems when gluing on the rest of the vehicle, and will cause gaps and other difficulties of getting it put together. So make sure it's all nice and clean, fits together well. So we're going to start by gluing together the tracks. So take your glue, add a dab of glue to the points that will connect to the other half. And then connect the two pieces. Making sure that everything's all securely put together. You should hear a nice click as everything goes together. And that side will be done. And then repeat it for the other side. Now that you have your two side pieces glued together, we're going to be moving on to adding the bottom of the Rhino. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to dry fit the bottom of the Rhino to the sides. Now there should be two pegs that are on the bottom that should fit into two slots that are in the sides of the Rhino. Sometimes these slots will have plastic filling them in when they were in the mold, so you might have to clear them out using your hobby knife or possibly a paper clip, anything that you can use that will clear the plastic. As you can see, I'm having a little bit of difficulty fitting this one piece on. Now that could show that there is something wrong with one of the holes or something wrong with one of these pegs. So I have to clear off what's on the pegs. Take a piece, a modeling knife, just score it through the section where the pegs go in. And it fits. Now it's important to dry fit it to see if it does work. Also, if this was glued in, then I wouldn't be able to put in the back door hatch. So take this apart, put in the door hatch. Make sure not to glue this in if you want it to be able to open up. If you want it to permanently stay closed, by all means glue it in, but in my opinion I think that's a waste of the new details that are brought in by this Rhino. Now you're going to want to take your super glue, or plastic glue, whichever you're using. I prefer super glue, and add it to the pegs. Add a little bit to the sides as well. And then apply that in. Make sure that it gets securely into the slots. fit, this door should be able to close and stay closed, but still be able to open. Now the next step of building the Rhino would be adding the front. And for this we're just going to do the same thing as before. Just going to add some glue to the model where the piece will sit. Try not to add too much, because there's no point of wasting glue, and a little bit goes a long way. Now, for the internal detail, we're going to move on to adding this hatch, which will lead to, which I would assume would be the cockpit of the Rhino. This just slides in. Although it is probably best to be glued in. So just add a slight amount of glue to the sides. And then slide in the piece. And the last step for the main hull, we'll be putting on the top. We'll be leaving the side doors off, as I'm planning on adding magnets to this Rhino. And so for that, we have to make sure not to glue these hatches in. So for this, we have to quickly add glue to the areas where this will be sitting. And the reason you want to do it quickly is because the glue will dry. Firmly press it in so that it lines up with the rest of the details. Pull it against the areas where you've glued it in. If some of the spots underneath where the glue ends up drying, or you missed it, as I seem to have here, it will pop up. You can quickly pull it open, find where it'll rest down, and add some glue. One of the easier ways that I find when something like this happens is I'll add a bit of glue to the side that's popping up. And I'll quickly put it down so that way it stays in alignment. Rather than having to pull off the whole top and re-glue it. So hold on the top for a couple of seconds to make sure that everything stays secure. And then the next steps for the Rhino will be adding the front part, which will be on here, which will cover the windows to the cockpit. So you just put those out. And up a bit. Now for this part, you're going to want to actually bend this piece. You're going to want it to go in both these slots. And you're going to actually want to force this in. But not so much that it will break it. This can be one of the most frustrating parts of making this Rhino. Now that I've got one in, it'll be easier to get the other one in. So this, I'm going to want to take it from the center, push against it with my other finger, and bend it slightly, so that way I can pop it in. Okay, so after you got your hatch in, after much frustration, there's that, and the top hatches. Which you don't want to glue in either. The reason you don't want to glue in the top hatches is because you might be able to use this vehicle as a razorback, or as a whirlwind, whichever vehicle shoots your fancy, depending on, if you are able to come across those types of bits. This is also the piece that's used for the Predator. So once again, if you're able to get these things, you might be able to use your vehicle as that, or make some sort of VDR. Now, the next part for the vehicle would be putting on the tracks and the lights. So now that your tracks are cut out, you're going to be wanting to make sure that you have the right ones on the right side. On the sprue there'll be an L and an R to represent the ones that are on the left and the right. So you're going to want to, once again, dry fit most of these pieces, see if they fit. And you're going to want to align these longest strips along roughly the middle of these, and make sure that these end just before, and so that there's not any sort of lead off or slack. They should stop at roughly the exact same spot. Take those off. Add a tab of glue to each wheel. push down firmly on the tracks to make sure that they're properly connecting in with the glue. Now I find it's best to work on one side of the tracks at a time as opposed to going back and forth. So you're going to want to find the next piece, which in this case will be one of the three-pieced treads. So you're going to want to line that up. And the next piece in the front will be one of the singular pieces. You're going to want to make sure that the teeth from each tread fits into the last one. And so then the last part, you're just going to want to take one of the two parts. So for this, we want to add a little bit of glue there, there, and on the inside of the tank there should be a spot where the piece will rest. I'm just going to make sure that the teeth fit up nice and snugly. Alright. And then we go to the back and repeat the same thing. So now that you've finished your treads, having them gone into both sides of the vehicle, say, well, you're more or less done the vehicle. You add the top hatches, keeping in mind that in this case the side hatches aren't put in, but I'm going to be magnetizing mine, so that would explain why, even though they seem to be fitting in very well right now. So the next thing that you're going to be wanting to be doing is making the storm bolter. Now for this piece, what I've done in the past is I've taken the storm bolter part and I've used this for either the storm bolter or I've used it for the hunter killer missile, and I have glued it into this piece. But I'm considering not gluing it in and spray painting it, and so hopefully that the tighter fit will hold it in. And that way I can use this as something else. So for the storm bolter, what you're going to want to do is there's a peg that's on this piece that will fit into a hole in the center of the storm bolter. You're going to want to insert the peg. And you're going to add glue to somewhere away from the peg so that way it doesn't go into there. And then apply the other side of the storm bolter. So now you have your weapon. So you can glue this in. In this case I'm going to choose not to. And then there you have the weaponry for the Rhino. Now the other thing that you need will be the top front hatch, which will be this piece, which will be the ring that does not have a gun piece connected for this. And there's going to be 4 doors, or hatch tops, I guess. And 2 of them are meant to be opened, and 2 of them are meant to be closed. So in this case, you're going to take the closed ones. So you apply those together. You can glue them, but I would advise against it, so that way you can use the piece for multiple purposes. Like putting a storm bolter in it, and then something else in the other part. And then that would be the completed Rhino. So, comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. And press the like button if you like this Rhino more than the original Rhino. Thanks for watching, and please watch part 2.